the 2023 NFL Hall of Fame class was officially inducted. We had 129 nominees, 28 semifinalists, 15 finalists, and 9 inductions for the year. Rondé Barber, Don Coryell, Chuck Howley, Joe Clico, not sure, Darrell Revis, Ken Riley, Joe Thomas, Zach Thomas, and DeMarcus Ware were enshrined in Canton. And of the 15 finalists, we had a Devin Hester, we had a Torry Holt, we had I think it was Reggie Wayne that was also in there.
Yep.
Was there anyone from the finalists that really was a snub to you and should have made it further into Canton?
Somebody you didn't mention, Jared Allen, should have gotten in on the first ballot, in my opinion. 12th all-time in sacks. I think he had was it 7 straight years with double-digit sacks, was just a pass-rushing monster.
Yeah.
Which, listen, you could argue, the NFL could argue, well, from a precedent standpoint, DeMarcus Ware ranks even higher than the all-time leader for sacks, and it took him 2 tries to get in. So I guess from a consistency standpoint, you could respect that. But no, I saw when, I remember they always announced, the week of the Super Bowl, when I didn't see Jared Allen's name. I'm not like a Vikings fan or anything, but I saw that, I was like, what? How did he miss it? But listen, I'd be shocked if he doesn't get it next year. Torry Holt was one you mentioned. Devin Hester is probably, he's up there with prime time, is probably the greatest returner we've ever seen. I would be shocked if he doesn't get in. So I think Jared Allen was the one that stuck out to me, like, wow, I can't believe he didn't get in the first ballot.
Yeah, you take a look at Jared Allen too, defensive rookie of the year, I believe, or no, did he come in 5th there? Not sure. 2005, second year, 11 sacks. 06, 7.5 sacks. From 07 to 2013, he never had less than 11.5 sacks.
And he had a 22 sack season.
Yeah, he did. 2011, 22 sacks, led the league. 2007, 15.5 sacks, led the league, and had 19 tackles for loss, also led the league there. 14.5 sacks in back-to-back seasons in 08 and 09. So from 07 to 09, 15.5, 14.5, 14.5, drops down to 11 in 2010, doubles it in 2011 at 22. Absolutely undeniable. And, it feels like you kind of forget about Jared Allen at points. Like I feel like he was one of the first few that really got the media coverage of how much he actually barked and talked to people on the field. And I don't feel like he was ever really rude, right? He knew how to talk smack. He was out there, right? So I have a lot of respect for him as a player, no doubt. There were 3 guys that I looked at. I feel like really 2 major ones, but I couldn't include these 2 without mentioning the third. First one, Devin Hester, of course, like you said. Some people might say, oh, well, he only returned kicks, but he's the all-time kick return leader. And he's the best return man in the game next to Deion Sanders. It's better than Deion. I want to say Deion actually gave him those reins and said that Devin Hester is better than me. He's got the records. He's got the speed. He's got the tape. He's got the numbers. He's got our respect. So I really would have liked to see him in Canton. Who knows, though? Because we know it's hard for it's kind of hard for all players to get in, but when you see of how people continuously get snubbed over and over and over again, it really makes you wonder. The next one I'm going to go here is Torry Holt. And when you look at how Torry Holt actually hasn't made it into the Hall of Fame, it's pretty interesting because you look at guys like Marvin Harrison. You look at guys like Randy Moss. Of course, you look at guys like, I'm trying to find it here to make sure I have it. Oh, yes, Terrell Owens. All of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. And when you look at, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Marvin Harrison, and then you have Torry Holt. When you look at their numbers in the span of the seasons that they played and where they actually sit on the records list, you would think that Torry Holt would get in there. But unfortunately, he doesn't. And he doesn't have 100 touchdowns. That could be what's killing him. Randy Moss had 131. Torry Holt has 74, so just about half, right? Terrell Owens had 118 touchdowns. He's in the Hall of Fame. Marvin Harrison had 107 touchdowns. He's in the Hall of Fame. But when you look at yards per game, when you look at total yards, when you look at yards per reception, he's right there in line. But just to know that the touchdowns could possibly be holding him out, we know what Torry Holt did. And to mention a monster, Andre Johnson, of course. Andre Johnson, one of the most respectable players in the game, kind of a Randy Moss, DK Metcalf, up in your face, very physical, will run you over, run past you type of player. Leads the Texans with like all franchise career, receptions, yards, touchdowns, whatever the case is. Andre Johnson's name is in that book next to wide receiver records. So Devin Hester, Andre Johnson, and Torry Holt were the 3 that I really would have liked to see go in. But for the final segment of the show...
Real quick, before we get in the final segment, I know I'm the guest, but I'd like to ask you a question regarding the Hall of Fame because it's an interesting... what is the fine line between, in terms of guys going the Hall of Fame, between guys who, like Frank Gore is a prime example. Frank Gore, I think, isn't he third all time in rushing? But nobody's going to say Frank Gore's the third best running back ever. Do you think,
Right.
what's the fine line between longevity? Because you mentioned Torry Holt, like in his prime, was just as good as any receiver in football. What's the fine line between guys who, had the long career, accumulated the stats? There's a lot of guys in the Baseball Hall of Fame, like, how'd they get him? Well, they played a long time and they were able to accumulate the stats, as opposed to, like, again, we'll get in the final segment, not to spoil anything, but Mahomes has played in the NFL as a starter for 5 years. I think he's a no doubt Hall of Famer, given what he's accomplished. What's the fine line? Because that's what I struggle with some of these voters. T.O., there was a lot of other stuff going into that with him taking 3 tries. But like Shannon Sharp, at his peak, Shannon Sharp was a monster, and it took him 3 tries to get in. DeMarcus Ware,
and he's a 3-time Super Bowl champion.
3-time Super Bowl champion. Yeah,
as a tight end.
Exactly. So it's I don't know. It's an interesting discussion to have. Like, what do you think is the fine line? In that.
I definitely think accolades play a part. Accolades. Some people are going to, like, Sony Michel just retired after 5 years. He's got two Super Bowl rings. Nobody's going to vote him into the Hall of Fame. So that's where you have to draw a line there. I think accolades in the amount of time. Mahomes, for example, 5-6 years in the league. He's on a very short list of multiple Super Bowl MVPs, multiple Super Bowl rings. First to do it since Kurt Warner in 2000 for the Super Bowl and the MVP collectively in the same year. So when you get into things like that, I think that's a fine line. When you're breaking records, or if there was undoubtedly a point in your career where you were a peak top 3 to 5, probably got to be top 5 at the worst to make it in. I feel like we've seen guys like, I can't think of names, but guys that might have been floating around that 6 to 7 to 9 or 10 position. We know they were monsters, but they haven't been in the Hall of Fame. They haven't got any votes, things of that nature. I definitely think longevity, your peak, and your accolades, especially with the amount of time that you were in the league for your accolades, just, kind of a rough answer there. I think that really does help, because we've heard it's hard for receivers to make it in. I mean, there were 129 nominees this year. 9 made it. Out of those 129, only 28 were semifinalists, and you go look at all 129, you're like, dang, I could probably pick out maybe 70, 80 of those guys I had a lot of respect. And then you get to the semifinalists, you probably know all the names. And as it goes down, you're like, dang, he didn't make it. He didn't make the cut. Oh, it's kind of rough, but I like to see it every year. I always have respect for everyone that goes in.
Absolutely.
It's not easy to make it in this league. It's not easy to win a Super Bowl, and it's definitely not easy to make it into the Hall of Fame as well.